All right, we have a lot to say today, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started while people are still entering, and I'll turn it over to Paula Jasinski of Greenfin.
Thank you. And Abby, can you show the next slide? Thank you. I just wanted to start off today's webinar with happy news and sad news. The happy news for Denise is that she's getting ready to enjoy some retirement. And of course, the sad news is that we're going to lose her expert and so wonderful facilitation skills here at the Roundtable. She may say a little bit more about the transition. So the Roundtable will continue. But Denise, who has really shepherded this from day one, is going to happily move into a retirement phase after this month. So we just put together some stats because this really started as a pandemic era conversation. How do we get people together around some of these big topics for, difficult conversations? And we can't say enough about Denise's expert handling of this and really making it grow to the audience it is today. We regularly have well over 100 attendees for every topic, and a lot of them are coming to hear her voice and the conversation, including the ones that she's handpicked to focus on. So we only have one Denise here that we're celebrating, 56 webinars since September of 2020, 126 speakers across those, and over 4,300 attendees across those. So we also, I wanted to acknowledge that she won this national award from Hermes Creative Awards for creating this podcast, this sort of audience and this sort of convening that doesn't really exist outside of other structures. The Bay program does a great job, but it's usually very agenda driven. And this really is a conversation among all of you. So thank you, Denise. Please join me in thanking her and wishing her well. I can't believe this is your last one, but thank you so much for everything you've given to this community.
Oh, thank you. And thanks to the community. I would like to say, Melissa Fagan, if you can come um, show your face, I'll be ably handing over the reins to Melissa Fagan, who's just been a wonderful colleague and is more than capable of handling the role. And I think she's excited to assume it. So I also wanted to thank you, the community, because that's really, you're really what's made this format so productive and helpful. So with that, I'll just start. This is the 56th episode. We started these as a place to ask clumsy questions and to sort of practice bravery and humility to have conversations. And we're so grateful again for the community that you've built around them. If this is your first, if you've missed the first 55, all you need to know is that they're designed for contribution, not consumption. And so as a reflection of that, we give our panelists about 25 minutes to make introductory remarks, and we reserve the last 30 minutes for discussion and questions. I usually start by why this topic by this time and by these speakers. And so EPA has singled out acid drainage from abandoned coal mines as the #1 water quality problem in Appalachia. And it's really the most severe and extensive water pollution problem, certainly in Western Maryland, West Virginia, and Northern Central and Western Pennsylvania. Especially for Pennsylvania, AMD is a major source of pollution. It affects 43 out of the Commonwealth's 67 counties. But it's not only a PA problem, it's a Chesapeake Bay one. And so every year, Susquehanna River Basin Commission estimates that the Susquehanna sends about 74 million pounds of acid and 32 million pounds of sediments with iron and aluminum into the Chesapeake Bay. So while that's a problem on its own, local effects of acidity, how does this affect what we're all trying to control, which is primarily nitrogen and phosphorus loads? And that's a really important question, and it's been left unanswered and largely unaddressed until recently. I'm not going to go through individuals, but our speakers have all worked to significantly contribute to answering that question, and all were co-authors on a recent report entitled Nutrient Reductions as Co-Benefits of Acid Mine Drainage Treatment. I think the link will be in the chat. So Charles and Jamie will give remarks, and Bob Hughes is here as on-the-ground expert and panelist and color commentator. So with that, I'm just going to turn it over to our speakers, and I believe Jamie is on deck to begin. So I'll turn the floor over.
Thank you, Denise. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. Give me a moment while I grab my screen. Okay, is that coming through?
Not yet.
Still not?
Still not. There you go.
See my slides?
Yeah, and I think if you go to slideshow, you'll be all set.
Okay,
There you go.
thanks. Okay,
Go.
so as Denise mentioned, I work for the Susquehanna River Basin Commission. I'm a program manager for our monitoring and protection group, and this group, in brief, includes an awful lot of monitoring throughout the Susquehanna watershed, including bay-related monitoring, and also importantly, we work on abandoned mine land and abandoned mine drainage issues. Most of what I'm going to speak on this afternoon has to do with pollution reduction crediting in conjunction with abandoned mine discharge and mine lands projects. And on my slide is the cover for the document that Denise introduced, in which we are and others were co-authors for. So the Chesapeake Bay watershed is a huge ecosystem, 64,000 square miles. There is a total maximum daily load imposed on the watershed to help restore and improve ecosystem functions in Chesapeake Bay. The entire watershed is involved in this, and this project has been ongoing for more than 40 years. What's going on is a focus on nutrients and sediment load reductions to improve the ecosystem functions in the bay. And by improving those functions in the bay and reducing these pollutants, improvements will also occur throughout the entire Chesapeake region watershed. I put a few things down here. The TMDL, we often refer to it as a pollution diet. The target limits for TN is total nitrogen are 186 million pounds per year, total phosphorus about 12.5 million pounds per year, and suspended sediments about 6.5 billion pounds per year. The map shows the ecosystem broken down by its 9 major river tributaries. The Susquehanna is the largest by area and also accounts for the largest inputs of fresh water to the bay, as well as the dominant proportions of these pollutants. Over the last 10 years, the annual average loads for total nitrogen and total phosphorus are shown for the 3 biggest tributaries to the bay: the Susquehanna, the Potomac River, and the James River. These 3 collectively account for more than 90% of the inputs to the bay of these important pollutants. As many of you are probably part of this process, certainly this region has benefited from a tremendous amount of scientific monitoring, modeling, and science-informed management and stewardship activities. There's more than a 40-year history at play here, and there is an awful lot of monitoring and modeling that goes into the management and progress tracking for the bay. This slide breaks down kind of on the left side are various monitoring activities, and on the right side are various models. This is a really elaborate, preeminent scientific approach. It also is absolutely dependent on a tremendous amount of cooperation, collaboration, and partnerships. And we certainly don't have time to delve into all that goes on here, but I did want to point out just the vast amounts of science management and financial commitments that go into this entire Chesapeake Bay partnership and program framework. This is showing a fair amount of detail that's not likely to come through, but what I want to point out here in these graphics that are furnished by USGS authors, as cited here, we're showing total nitrogen in the left half and total phosphorus inputs to the bay in the right from what's referred to as the non-tidal network of monitoring stations. And there are more than 120 of these stations distributed throughout the bay watershed. This is these images are showing the last 10 years of monitoring data, and the pie chart is essentially showing the snapshot of trends. Over here on the left is total nitrogen. Over here on the right is total phosphorus. And essentially what we would like to see at this point is green, meaning the trends are improving. The loads of total nitrogen and total phosphorus from these monitored tributaries we would ideally like to see improving, or the loads being reduced through time. That is happening, but it's not happening throughout the bay watershed. We're seeing improvements in nitrogen and phosphorus. We're seeing some declines, and in a few places we're seeing no trends at all. The maps are color shaded to show where the hotspots expressed as yield. So that's a mass per unit area. The darker colors represent higher masses from those watersheds. Importantly, for nitrogen, we're seeing the highest source areas in the lower portions of the Susquehanna and parts of the Potomac, in some of the Eastern Shore watersheds. These areas tend to very much coincide with intense agricultural production and some of our higher population areas. Similar pattern exists for total phosphorus, but there are some other regional differences, as you can see in these yellow highlights. And importantly, this last oval that I show is in northeastern Pennsylvania. It coincides with anthracite coal areas. I don't have an overlay for it, but also similarly, we're seeing some high phosphorus in some of the bituminous coal areas of the western parts of the Chesapeake region. One of the things that I wanted to talk about during my time are the best management practices. So there are a lot of management practices that are used to mitigate or reduce the pollutant loads to the local watersheds and also the Chesapeake Bay. Within the Chesapeake TMDL framework, there are hundreds of approved management practices for reducing the inputs of nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment. The point of this slide is just to show there's a quick reference guide that gives a description and includes the load reductions expressed as efficiencies, or in some cases, outright reductions for adopting or implementing certain practices. I'm showing the Susquehanna River watershed on the right with a land cover, an awful lot of prioritization around the management practices goes into specific load sources. And these load sources tend to correlate at broad levels to the land cover and land use categories. So for those unfamiliar with the Susquehanna region, the southern and lower portions of the watershed tend to have higher population centers and in particular, a lot more agriculture compared to other parts of the watershed. There's an important set of models in the Chesapeake Bay TMDL framework that's called the Chesapeake Assessment Scenario Tool, or CAST. And it's a web-based nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment load modeling tool for environmental planning. It includes best management practice, loads reduction manager. And what I want to talk about briefly here are how the load reductions are incorporated into the Chesapeake Assessment Scenario Tool. There is a rigorous and defined protocol for developing these load reductions. And there's a flow chart, of course, that has to go along with that of essentially what it takes to get pollutant load reduction efficiencies developed and established and accepted within the Chesapeake Assessment Scenario Tool. So this helps, along with the numerous suite of models, to account for changes in dynamics between variability, natural factors, and intentional management activities. Load changes in the model occur by either changing a land use. So for instance, a forest could be cleared for agriculture or some type of development that would change the pollutant loads from that type of land use. There can be an adoption of a BMP, or best management practice, and an approved credit adjustment for adoption or implementation of that practice. There are also ways to measure the reductions either in a direct load to a land use, as in just essentially using less, for instance, of a fertilizer, or a measured reduction from some sort of treatment. So there can be a credit adjustment that's based on an efficiency, or there can be a protocol that's accepted and approved that actually measures the reduction from a particular project or activity. So what are the effects of legacy mining and abandoned mine discharge and abandoned mine land restoration on the pollutant loads to the Chesapeake Bay framework? So what I'm showing here in these two photographs, on the left is a healthy, intact, forested aquatic stream ecosystem, and on the right is a forested aquatic ecosystem that's been damaged severely by legacy mining issues. And the main point of this is that healthy, intact ecosystems are efficient, meaning they're tight regulators of nutrients and sediment flow into, through, and out of those systems. So the core essence with respect to the Bay TMDL is, how would we account for pollutant load changes if we try to repair or restore a system that was broken due to legacy mining? And for
Jamie,
those who will, yeah, go ahead.
You're at 12:19, so.
Oh my goodness. Okay. This is my last slide. So one of the things that we tackled in the document were some suggestions for what type of scientific studies would be required or necessary to make these load reduction estimates that could be applied in the Chesapeake Assessment Scenario Tool model. And I'm pointing to a couple of documents that are provided by the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. These include detailed procedures for setting up, designing studies, quality assurance, how to collect samples, and how to interpret them for the types of science that would help an expert panel answer the questions about load reductions. So I will stop there, Denise, and yield to Chuck.
Okay, thanks, Jamie. And that last slide will include those resources in the follow-up.
Okay, my sharing has stopped for you.
Yes, it has. We see your lovely face. So, Chuck, you have the floor, and I see your slides showing up. You're in, there you go. You're good to go. Thank you. Oops,
No, I think this is what I wanted to do.
there
Are
you
we
go.
good?
Yes, you're good.
Okay. I'll get my pointer going. So I was a USGS research hydrologist until the end of 2023. And the work that I'm going to describe essentially is a product of that from that time frame. And there's a paper that was co-authored with several USGS colleagues and some academic collaborators in Science of the Total Environment. And that's the basis for the most of the presentation today. And there are many details in that paper. So this slide is a graphical abstract with highlights of the presentation. Phosphorus transport from the Susquehanna River to the Chesapeake Bay has not decreased to target values in many locations. And legacy sediment in the Susquehanna River could be a source of bioavailable phosphate. Since the 1950s, baseline pH of the Susquehanna River has increased from about 6.5 to 8. And this is along the entire length of the Susquehanna River. And at alkaline pH, phosphate may be desorbed from river sediment to the water column. The Susquehanna River watershed supplies more than half the fresh water and is the largest source of nitrogen and phosphorus and sediment loading to the bay. The Susquehanna River watershed also has the greatest extent of legacy coal mining and acid mine drainage compared to other watersheds in the bay. And it's mainly associated with the western west branch of the Susquehanna River, which drains the bituminous coal field, and then the main branch, which drains parts of the anthracite coal field. So excess nutrient concentrations, for example, total phosphorus greater than about 0.01 to 0.05 milligrams per liter in fresh water, can lead to eutrophication and harmful algal blooms. Mitigation requires an understanding of the nutrient sources and processing within the watershed. Typical sources of excess phosphorus include municipal wastewater and runoff from agriculture and urban areas. But regardless of the sources, concentrations of soluble reactive phosphorus or orthophosphate, that's PO4, tend to be maintained at low levels, less than 0.1 milligram per liter in fresh water because of rapid uptake of phosphate by algae and plants and its tendency to sorb onto iron and aluminum oxides and to precipitate as sparingly soluble iron, aluminum, or calcium phosphate minerals. So consequently, most of the phosphorus transported to and within streams is associated with suspended solids, fine bed sediments, and organic matter. And such solids are the primary reservoirs of bioavailable phosphorus in freshwater systems. So this slide shows a decadal trends map of the Chesapeake Bay watershed with symbols indicating changes in total phosphorus loads. These maps are updated annually. Despite widespread implementation of best management practices across the Bay watershed, total phosphorus loads have increased at key stations such as the lower Susquehanna River, Conestoga River, Choptank River, and locally heavy applications of manure, contributions from legacy phosphorus, and increasing contributions from dissolved phosphorus have been proposed and debated as possible causes. An analysis of more recent decadal periods indicated trends for given sites could change in direction and significance. And for example, total phosphorus at Conowingo Dam at the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay, at the mouth of the Susquehanna River, recently was indicated as having no trend and improving trend in different years. Regardless, the debate and investigation of possible causes of nutrient trends continues. So the Conowingo Reservoir, which is the largest and most downstream impoundment on the Susquehanna River, and two upstream impoundments above Holtwood and Safe Harbor dams, have been accumulating sediment for nearly 100 years. These impoundments have now reached their sediment storage capacity. Huge quantities of accumulated legacy sediment within these impoundments could be a potential unaccounted source of dissolved phosphorus to the bay. Because the sediment-bound phosphorus is not accumulating as in the past, phosphorus load entering Conowingo Reservoir now approaches the quantity exiting the impoundment at Conowingo Dam. So we're seeing a convergence of these inflow-outflow loads. And also the export of dissolved phosphorus, primarily of orthophosphate, has not changed in concert with the decreased in total phosphorus. So you have a greater decrease in total, but the decrease in phosphate hasn't changed as much. So the question I'm asking is, could changes in river chemistry drive phosphorus mobilization from accumulated sediments in the Conowingo Reservoir and other upstream locations? Two seemingly unrelated hypotheses are considered in this presentation. First, legacy sediment that has filled major impoundments is a source of dissolved phosphate entering the Chesapeake Bay. And second, legacy coal mines and acid mine drainage in the upper Susquehanna River Basin influence phosphate mobility throughout the river system. So anthracite coal in eastern Pennsylvania and bituminous coal in western Pennsylvania and states to the south and west have been extensively mined over the last 3 centuries. Thousands of abandoned or legacy mines and associated abandoned mine discharges are distributed across the coal fields. Drainage and runoff from abandoned coal mines has polluted more than 5,000 miles of streams and associated water supplies in the northern Appalachian coal field. And as shown by this map, many streams draining areas underlain by coal in the northern West Virginia and Pennsylvania are fishless or contain few fish. And although the severity of pollution has decreased, the distribution of AMD impaired streams has changed little since this map was prepared in 1995 by the US EPA. Piles of mine spoil or calm are common features of abandoned mine lands. The steep erodible banks may be situated next to streams. Airflow into the banks can facilitate the oxidation of pyrite and the formation of acidic drainage. And to avoid pumping of water when mining was active, where the topography was favorable, mines were developed up dip, or drainage tunnels may have been installed to facilitate the water drainage by gravity. After the mines close, AMD continues to flow unabated while oxygenated air flows inward and circulates throughout the workings of above the tunnel level, continuing its potential for pyrite oxidation. Typically, at least 2 vertical shafts were driven to multiple working levels in a mine complex, enabling air circulation and access to the greatest depth of mining. After mine closure and flooding, mine water from deep horizons may upwell through these shafts. And often these are at low points because they didn't have to dig as deep to install the shafts. In general, AMD that discharges from vertical shafts and boreholes tends to be anoxic and commonly with near neutral pH and low concentrations of aluminum, but high concentrations of dissolved ferrous iron. And groundwater that's filled some abandoned mines rose to elevations of buildings and roads after the mines had closed, flooding such infrastructure. And drainage boreholes such as that shown here were installed in topographically low points, typically along drainage ways where the water could discharge directly to streams. Remediation of AMD from such boreholes is difficult because of proximity to the streams. AMD typically has high concentrations of dissolved iron, aluminum, and manganese, and low concentrations of nutrients. Low pH and high concentrations of metals in AMD could limit nutrient availability and aquatic productivity in receiving streams. This map shows the watershed boundary for the Chesapeake Bay, the area underlain by the coal fields, and abandoned mine drainage in these reds in numerous tributaries of the Susquehanna River. So 2 major tributaries are highlighted as examples. The Lackawanna River, which enters the North Branch or the main Susquehanna River near Pittston, where AMD is from extensive underground mines, and that's the main source of pollution in the eastern area. And in Clearfield Creek in western West Branch, where AMD from underground and surface mines degrade streams in the area. And I want to point out, these red tones are for the streams that are identified as degraded and have TMDLs for AMD, and it includes the main stem of the West Branch of the Susquehanna and the Susquehanna itself. So it's not just the tributaries that are identified as impaired. This Google Earth image shows the confluence of the Lackawanna River and the Susquehanna River at Pittston. The AMD impacts to the Lackawanna and Susquehanna rivers are obvious from space because of the accumulation of rust-colored hydrous iron oxide that precipitates in stream below the Old Forge borehole outfall, approximately 2.5 miles upstream from the Susquehanna. So this is the Susquehanna and this is the Lackawanna River. And then this Google Earth image shows the confluence of Clearfield Creek and West Branch Susquehanna River near Clearfield, Pennsylvania. And the whitish turbidity and staining results from precipitation of hydrous aluminum oxide that forms the white flock and may be transported many miles downstream. Through various field studies, investigators have demonstrated that where AMD and nutrient-bearing effluents mix in stream, dissolved phosphate tends to be sequestered to solids. In some cases, observed decreases in phosphate concentrations are better explained by the formation of insoluble iron phosphate or aluminum phosphate compounds instead of or in addition to absorption by iron and aluminum oxides. And all these mechanisms can be active in a given system depending on the relative abundance of metals and the pH in the system. Laboratory studies have demonstrated phosphate removal from solution during or following the precipitation of iron or aluminum hydroxides at pH 5 to 8, which is typical of stream water. So you get a decrease in concentration of phosphate in these systems up through the near neutral pH zone. But as shown for these diagrams, at alkaline pH values, the phosphate removal is not as effective and may be actually reversed by desorption and dissolution processes. Thus, changing pH and other water quality characteristics could affect potential for phosphate attenuation by solids. So model results demonstrate lake sediment. This is the Conowingo Reservoir itself, lake sediment chemistry, having a constant composition of about 6.5% iron, almost 3% aluminum, and 0.5% of manganese effectively absorbs phosphate at acidic to neutral pH, whereas desorption occurs at alkaline pH values. And the simulations specify a total concentration of only 0.01 milligrams per liter or 0.05 milligrams per liter of phosphate, which is typically observed. And all the curves show that given a small concentration of total phosphorus relative to the available sorbent, adsorption can sequester nearly all the phosphorus to the point of it being unavailable in these near neutral pH range. However, as the pH increases to alkaline pH values, phosphate may be desorbed to the water column and therefore no longer limiting to algal growth.
Chuck,
So,
if you could finish up in a couple minutes, that would be great.
yeah, that's what I'm doing.
Okay.
Okay, so this is what the opening slide, and it's just basically the long-term changes in pH in the stream water could drive phosphorus attenuation and release. So the average pH of rainwater has increased from 4 to 5.5 over the past 35 years across the Chesapeake Bay watershed. pH of acid mine drainage has increased while metals concentrations and loadings have decreased, and the same is true for the river itself. Since the 1950s, the baseline pH has increased from about 6.5 in the West Branch and the North Branch of the Susquehanna River, and positive but less pronounced trends in pH with current baseline pH around 8 at all these sites now observed in the Susquehanna River. And in any given year, the pH variability by 2 to 3 units reflects variations in flow conditions as well as diel variations. So water quality in shallow rivers and lakes can be extremely variable because of these diel cycles associated with daytime, nighttime variations in sunlight, with pronounced effects on water temperature, dissolved oxygen, pH, and specific conductance. The ideal changes in pH of 1 to 2 units may result, then this is like over a 24-hour cycle because of CO2 uptake through photosynthesis during the day, which increases pH, followed by CO2 release by respiration during the night. And this slide shows actual data illustrating that for the Susquehanna River at Columbia, just above the uppermost of the 3 impoundments in the Susquehanna River. And these data show that daily maximum values of pH of from 8.5 to 9 are common in the summer and fall, corresponding to daily maximum concentrations of dissolved oxygen, and both increasing in daylight because of photosynthesis by algae and other aquatic plants. The point about this algae is that it could be limiting by the available phosphorus, but as it grows, it increases pH through photosynthesis, which could result in more release of phosphate, that it helps it grow further. Studies have demonstrated phosphorus release from aquatic sediment could be a major component of phosphorus loading to freshwater bodies, especially during summer when pH is greatest. And for example, during April to September, this is in Delavan Lake in Wisconsin, the phosphorus released from wetland sediments accounted for about 50% of the total phosphorus loading to the lake. And it was oxic sediments that released the most phosphorus, primarily in response to the high pH. Anoxic sediments release less phosphorus. And that's relevant because it's not the reductive dissolution of the iron oxides that's accounting for this change. It's the desorption process. So in conclusion, historical inflows of low pH metal-laden AMD to the Susquehanna River facilitated the sequestration of phosphorus, with legacy sediment retained, huge quantities of legacy sediment retained in impoundments, and long-term increases in baseline pH of the Susquehanna River to current values around 8, with daily maxima of 9, may now result in the periodic release of phosphate from sediment and its export from Conowingo, and release of phosphate into the water column may spur algal growth, which removes CO2 and drives pH to higher values, facilitating additional phosphate release and exacerbating potential for harmful algal blooms. So that's the last slide.
Wow, thank you, Chuck. That's a lot of information. I almost don't know what to think. Let me remind the audience that I will facilitate the questions out of the chat. I do have some that were submitted beforehand, but please enter them into the chat because ones entered live go to the top of the list. But to start, Bobby, you're part of this panel, so I'll just sort of ask everybody on the panel to, give your take on the question. And if you don't have anything more to add, that's fine. Don't feel compelled. But one of the first questions is, and I don't know what to think about this after these presentations, is why is acid mine drainage not included in the TMD, in the CAS modeling or the TMDL modeling, and should it be by virtue of its impact on nutrient cycling and nutrient loads? And so go ahead, who would like to sort of take a crack at that first?
Well, I might just, chime in and say we've been trying for a number of years to see what the formula was for the model with such a focus on nitrogen and phosphorus and the definition of sediments. And maybe the model doesn't take into account the metal load-ins as much as we think it probably should, because that could, in effect, show why there's a stronger assimilative capacity downstream of maybe some of the areas that are cleaned up by the AMD removal and the sediment removal to allow for other sediment loads to be increased, or total dissolved solids, total suspended solids in the downstream water that might be coming from some of the more agricultural heavily impacted waterways. But I'm not sure why it isn't in that particular model when there are a number of systems here, as I mentioned in the chat. If you look at the Datashed website, where I know there's over 189 treatment systems in the bay that are removing various load reductions of metals from iron, aluminum, manganese, more than likely the top three trace metals that have not been really accounted for in any way that could show some of those reductions. And some of those systems have been in place for over 20 plus years. And I recall going back into the early watershed implementation plans, the WIPs, the early WIPs, and trying to make comments about that, and also load reductions from sediments from reclaimed abandoned mine sites where there was stream restoration being done with private partners, with our cogeneration facility plant operators that do reclamation, and even sites that are being reclaimed by the active industry. Those stream areas that are being restored or water is being removed from going into the mines to become mine drainage don't have much accounting in the equation for that model. But I'm not really sure who entirely built the cast and when it was initially done, but it's something that we continue to ask those questions. And now I think we have a lot more data to back that up on why it should be looked at a little bit closer.
Mm. Thank you. That's a great answer. Jamie and Chuck, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think, to the question as to why the AMD remediation wasn't included in this, I think part of it is just context and history. Again, the Bay TMDL has been driven largely by nitrogen inputs, and there were just a lot of things in the Bay watershed landscape that contribute nitrogen that just come ahead of AMD remediation. I think there is a lot more science available, and there's a lot more case studies that look at how repair and restoration related to abandoned mine issues could be factored into the Bay model. But I think it's mostly just been a matter of priorities and scale in terms of what's been moving the Bay process forward.
Okay, I'd like to make 2 points. One, there are TMDL specific to AMD on many tributaries. So it's the identified pollutants of concern, low pH and high metals, where those TMDLs are in place. And then two, a lot of what I described as long-term changes in pH, et cetera, is not the result of treatment systems going into place. It's primarily natural attenuation. It's just there's a finite amount of pyrite available in the rock, and over time it's basically burned out, and it becomes, they're less likely to produce acid over time. And that's I think another factor that we just haven't really considered. And if we are going to go forward and look at land use and BMP, et cetera, related to mining, we also need to look at what would happen in the absence of those any other practices.
Yeah, that's a great point, Chuck. Let me ask one from Lou Linker, who has a lot of interest. Lou says there were time series plots of pH for Lewistown and Danville. Do we have companion figures of the same time and sites that show total phosphorus and orthophosphate? And what would those plots show?
I pulled the data. Those are USGS data, and there aren't as many data points on other constituents. I think I created graphs. I can't answer right off the bat what I charted. I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. Let me ask a question more directed at treatment capabilities. So if we were to have more of a drive to remediate AMD, what's the sort of treatment possibility for all surface water impacted by acid mine drainage? I know, Bobby, you referred to the number of sites in the watershed, 189, I guess you said, treatment systems in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. How many are there, and would we have the ability actually to do a good job of remediating AMD impacts?
Mm. It's if we look at overall, I think we've documented like 5,000 just discharge points of abandoned mine drainage across the entire state.
Mm.
I don't have the exact number of discharge points just within the Susquehanna River Basin and the area that drains to the bay, but the those points are all tied to very complex underground hydrogeology of abandoned mines throughout both the bituminous region and in the eastern anthracite and northern bituminous region as well. And there is a website that folks can take a look at minemaps.psu.edu and just see where we've put in alone over 24,000 mine maps of the surface and underground areas for just the anthracite region. And there's been additional maps put in by lots of colleges and universities that are participating in a program with the state to really kind of get a handle and a location on where is all this water coming from, because it doesn't flow the same as surface hydrology of a watershed. It's very
Mm.
unique, and there's barrier pillars that have been removed, and we hear things about robbing the pillars. All that means something to the mining regions, that we end up sending water from one area to another and drain it by gravity or try and get it out so we can mine lower veins of coal that are up to 1,500 feet in depth. So there's a lot of challenges when it comes to looking at these things, and we're really in the last 10 or 15 years only beginning to really understand that, because of the fact that we have these mind maps now that we can turn from 2D images and maps into three-dimensional models, and we're working towards that to have a better understanding of both volume and storage and discharge. But many of the groups that we work with in the region and across the state, they don't have the means to do what we need in terms of monitoring, even to get both the calculations that we need. You need flow and chemistry to determine the load-ins, as many of us may know, but you've got to have that in place in order to do that. So it will be a challenge to take on the 5,500 plus miles of streams that we know about that are mining impacted in Pennsylvania. But I can't say we'd be 100% done with it in a short period of time, given the money and time and people and capacity. But there's an attenuation of AMD over the decades, like Chuck has shown, and there is some natural ability for that to slow down. But I don't know if it's justifiable just to say, well, let's just wait another 100 years and let our children and grandchildren continue to deal with the mine drainage in the bay that we've had to live through, which doesn't
Hmm.
really seem fair. So if we're going to speed that up and we're going to build systems and we're going to work in partnership, to clean up the bay and clean up the headwaters, these communities that we're working in really deserve that opportunity to have that looked at a lot closer and become a priority, we think. But yeah, so that's a challenge. So I'm not going to say we're going to be able to clean it all up in my lifetime, but we have a legacy to leave for the work that we're all doing here for the future generations, and I think we should, continue to focus on that, in addition to the other pollution sources that are in other parts of the bay, but particularly the mining legacy that has been left to us to handle. That's not cheap. It's not easy. It's on lands that are owned by coal operators in a lot of senses that we still have to work and maintain relationships with to be able to access and monitor and then even build treatment systems. So there's lots of work to do, and I think we're going in a very positive direction. And that's where I think it would help us to continue to keep this
Hmm.
an issue to be discussed and talked about.
Hmm. Let me ask a follow-up question. So if I kind of combine, the concept of, really burning out the pyrite and the time scale that we're talking about, it seems as if the local TMDL approach, because it's really a local issue primarily, more than I'm getting the sense than a collective issue to the Chesapeake Bay, but it's got a real local, there's a very local reason clean those things up and based on acidity and metal concentration. Um, is that correct that a kind of tributary specific TMDLs for pH and metals might
Yes.
might be an effective way to go?
Yes. So, I just want to add to what Bobby was saying too. There's about 300 discharges in the anthracite region, which is exclusively, Susquehanna, and then probably 4 or 5 times that number in the bituminous area. So around 1,000 at least. But then size matters. A lot of the anthracite discharges are massive. They're the size of third order, fourth order streams. They drain 20 to 30 square miles at the point when they discharge. And the streams above are pretty much dry. It's like a karst environment. So it gets complicated, and treating those systems is not simple. It's really an industrial scale of a effort.
Mm.
Most of the treatment systems I think that were counted that Bobby was mentioning, they're small. They're passive systems. They're on relatively small, accessible discharges. So the problem is big and it's difficult, and it's not really manageable. There's prioritization schemes that are useful for, how do you spend your money? Where are you going to get the biggest bang for your buck? The Pennsylvania DEP is really good about trying to manage what they have in terms of, funding and priorities. So I just wanted to get those points out there.
Mhm. Jamie, anything to add or?
No, I think Chuck summed it up really well. It is a it's a problem from the past. It is very complicated and very expensive to fix these things, and it's very, very widespread. The local TMDL issues matter, and the local communities that are affected warrant the attention that's happening. But it's related to Bay issues, but I look at it as more of a regional or local issue of concern. That I think the point I made in my presentation about the disruption of healthy ecosystems and what that means to nitrogen processing, it matters. That could probably be quantified and incorporated. And I think Chuck's points about the liberation of previously sequestered phosphorus forms, it is a fact that is going to have to be dealt with. It's not necessarily tied to the remediation of these insults per se, as much as some of the other factors that he's brought up and that I think Lou is commenting on as well.
Scott Heidel has an interesting comment. I guess he says AMD remediation is super challenging because there are no bonds or permits since they are abandoned, but have nasty discharges that must be creatively treated. Is the primary obstacle the fact that they're abandoned, or is there a significant challenge in treatment technologies and capabilities? Because you're talking about the scale of the ones in the anthracite region. So where does sort of technology kind of interplay with the problem of abandonment in sort of addressing them on whatever scale?
I could chime in and just to make sure folks are clear on the term abandonment, because that's another misconception, is that all these discharges are out there and why aren't we cleaning them up? Why can't we just go to them and try and take care of them and build a treatment system or build an active treatment plant, because we need to have that done to remove the loads of the pollution that we're seeing in the communities. But the real answer is that, the majority of these lands and discharges are on private property, and they're on coal operator owned lands that are still protected and have liability protections under the Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act of 1977. So, when we talk about abandoned mine discharges, those are these sites that have been previously abandoned. And when that kind of shell game happened back in 77, where coal companies were either going to go bankrupt, form another corporate shell, put it under some other family's name, or there was a land transfer to another entity that relieve them from having to be responsible for the actual treatment and reclamation of all these sites that we see, not just in terms of AMD, but also abandoned mine lands. And so there's this necessity for us to work with them and find a way that they're going to be able to they're actually going to benefit somehow from the reclamation and restoration of these lands. And are they going to give up those lands? Are they going to give them up through an easement to another entity? Or is the state going to be willing to take over the sites and then operate and maintain those sites in perpetuity? That's a big decision that needs to be made on a lot of these systems that smaller organizations like nonprofits that are doing watershed work, that's not their forte. They're doing the communications, the education, the outreach, the water quality monitoring, the data gathering, maybe some flushing and some minimal operation and maintenance. But when it comes down to it, depending on where you're at, East and Western PA, and other states in West Virginia and others that have AMD, scale of the type of systems and who's going to kind of operate and maintain those systems and the investment of the millions of dollars that it might take for very high volume discharges like Old Forge or the Jetto Mine Tunnel in the east that are just so voluminous that you can't just build a wetlands and walk away. You need something on the scale of a wastewater treatment plant. So that becomes a big challenge. And there's only so much money that goes towards those efforts, and it's set aside funds out of some of the federal pots of money that do come in. And the Stream Act was something that was passed that has like Senator Casey put that through, and it affects all of Appalachia and can be used nationally for funding for that future operation and maintenance of new treatment systems that would be designed. So there's some benefit there. But when you start looking at the surface mining law under the Office of Surface Mining and DOI and Interior, and then you start looking at Clean Water Act stuff under EPA or EPA brownfields, they're very different legal definitions when it comes to that type of abandonment or brownfields. And so there's a challenge there that, we're trying to weave through all of this complexity, and it's often not a straight line, for sure.
That was really illuminating. Thanks a lot, Bobby. We have about 3 minutes left, and so I traditionally ask each of the panelists for what you would like the audience actually to lead with. I will remind everybody that we submit everything that wasn't addressed to the panelists and give them a chance to answer all those questions so that your question will get answered in one form or another. Don't despair. So in these last couple minutes, I'll just ask for sort of what would you like to leave us with in terms of actually the nutrient co-benefits of acid mine drainage treatment. In whatever order, who would like to go first?
I would just start out by saying that restoring and repairing these damaged areas is a co-benefit in a lot of ways, and some of these discharges have been affecting these systems and these communities for literally generations, hundreds of years in some cases. Trying to stem those pollutants, whether they affect the bay or not, is vastly important and brings around a ton of benefits.
Yeah, I would say exactly that, and also add that there are economic benefits that extend beyond the region too. And so we're talking about a Chesapeake Bay wide context. I mean, it's bigger than that. And there's been federal money brought in to help address the issues. And I just Bobby was talking about, legacy or abandoned mines from 1977 in the past. Their coal mining has brought in money locally, but there's a tax on the coal that's redistributed to the states where there's the greatest abandoned mine problems. And that's how Pennsylvania has benefited from that tax. It's now coal's more mined more in the west part of the state of the country than it is now in Pennsylvania. Anyway, I guess I ran out of time, so I'll just stop.
All right, Bobby, you get to take us home.
Oh, well, just know that there is a lot of effort in the upper headwaters and the tributaries of the Chesapeake Bay by a number of groups, committed volunteers, and conservation districts and partners that both my coalition and our Western Pennsylvania coalition are very entrenched in. And, we wouldn't be running 27 annual conferences on abandoned mine reclamation every year if it wasn't important to the people of our coalfield communities. And we invite people from other states to join us in those annual conferences. And we do trainings, so we do look for funding and partnership opportunities and ways to work with the Bay and the Bay programs to bring funding to these types of projects. And we support, the Chesapeake Bay program and all of its efforts and other projects to do the work in the agricultural sector and, reducing these other loads as a part of the overall Bay. So I'm very happy to be a part of the new STAC stakeholders committee here in the last few months and have been trying to make some headway and let folks know about all the work that we're doing up here. And it's been great to meet people from the other parts of the Bay in Maryland and Virginia and West Virginia as other partners to really, maybe clear up some misconceptions and also let them know about the more tributary tasks that we've been doing up here to clean up the headwaters. And we'll continue to do that. And we look forward to, continuing those partnerships down the road.
Well, thanks to all our panelists, and that was just wonderful. I learned so much, and thanks for the community. I'm sad to leave you, but you're in good hands. I'll be attending all the roundtables from now on, so make sure you join us Wednesday, July 16th for the next CRC Roundtable. And thanks again to the panelists. You were spectacular. Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Enjoy your
Thank you.
retirement, Denise.
Yeah.
Will do.